Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we are doing a two-part series about air passenger rights and a recent legal challenge to those protections brought by a group of airlines. This March, the Supreme Court of Canada heard a legal challenge in the case called International Air Transport Association versus the Canadian Transportation Agency. Passenger protections created by regulation can require airlines to pay compensation for flight cancellations, delays, denied boarding, or lost or damaged baggage. I'm sure many of you watching will have experienced a flight delay. It is basically a given that if you've ever flown on an airplane, you have been inconvenienced in some way. And in some cases, you may be entitled to make a claim under regulations for financial compensation from the airlines. But a group of 18 airlines, including Air Canada and Porter, have argued that the air passenger protection regulations exceed the Canadian Transportation Agency's authority and violate a treaty called the Montreal Convention. They have argued that these regulations should be rendered invalid for international flights. The Federal Court of Appeal dismissed the airline's case except for one regulation related to liability for temporarily lost baggage, which it did find was outside of the agency's authority, but the other regulations were upheld. The case has now gone to the Supreme Court. Gabor Lukács is the president and founder of the nonprofit Air Passenger Rights and was an intervener in this case. And John Gradick is a lecturer and program coordinator at McGill University. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how these air passenger protections work, and then in the follow-up, we'll be discussing the legal challenge to those protections. Thank you both so much for joining me today. First, Gabor, can you tell me about the air passenger protection regulations? How do they work, and what kinds of inconveniences can you be compensated for by an airline, and maybe how much are those claims worth?
So Canada's air passenger protection regulations is a poor man's copy of the European Union's gold standard. They don't work. That's part of the problem. The European regulations provide standardized compensation to passengers in the event of flight delay, cancellation, or denial of boarding, and allow airlines to escape those compensations only in the case that the delay or flight cancellation was caused by extraordinary circumstances, which are known to be very narrow exceptions. That, for example, maintenance issues or a strike of the airline's own employees or even death of an airline employee would not be excluded. Airlines who still have to pay passengers compensation in those cases. Unfortunately, in Canada, the current government put forward a legislation which created a framework where it is very difficult, if not impossible, to make good regulations because they created an excessively complex system of classification of flight disruptions, whether it was caused by circumstances outside the carrier's control or within the carrier's control, but required for safety reasons, or a third case, which is within the carrier's control and not required for safety reasons, and different level of rights and compensation is owed only in the last residual case when it is within the carrier's control and not required for safety. So I see you smiling, Christine, and I wouldn't be surprised if anybody listening to it is already feeling that their head is spinning. That is exactly the problem. Courts have found that this system is unreasonably complicated, unnecessarily complicated, requiring a very large amount of evidence to decide entitlement to compensation, and that creates a barrier to access to justice.
Right. John, maybe you could at a high level explain, if someone does experience one of these inconveniences, which can be pretty devastating if you've saved up a lot of money to go on a vacation or you're going to, on a trip for compassionate reasons, for example, having your trip canceled, denied boarding, or even a delay can be devastating. So if that happens to someone, how do they make these claims? What exactly can you tell me about the process? We've got about a minute.
Yeah, I think that you're supposed to receive communication from the airline about a delay or cancellation, and that's either in an email, an SMS message telling you have a delay. The delay is because of X, Y, or Z, and you may be entitled to compensation. So after the flight itself, you can basically put a claim in to the airline if you were delayed and you meet the criteria for compensation associated with the length of
Now,
time.
John, not to interrupt, but does that actually happen? I've had a lot of delayed flights and no one ever tells me I'm entitled to compensation.
It's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen. So whether that actually happens or not is an
Right.
issue. But the airline is supposed to
Wait,
tell you,
yeah,
and then
but yeah,
they're
we've got to go to break, but we'll be right back.